My husband, 42, male, and I, 36, female, have been married for 2 years. We met through friends 4 years ago and got married 3 years back. I never thought about getting married, to be honest, and only agreed to it because my husband believed that we were soulmates. I did love him a lot, which is why after he asked me the third time, I finally ended up saying yes. I come from a broken home and grew up watching my parents fight over every petty little thing until my dad cheated on my mom when I was 14 and they finally filed for divorce. I have a strained relationship with both my parents and see them only once a month, which is an arrangement that works for all of us involved. But their relationship made me develop really negative feelings towards the institution of marriage itself, and that's why I was so hesitant. Nevertheless, I did say yes eventually. My mother-in-law, however, knew that I declined her son's wedding proposals twice already. This came up at our wedding during my husband's toast, and he meant it as a joke, obviously, which everyone laughed at, including me. But my mother-in-law didn't find it very funny, and we got into an argument about it later on as well, where she told me to my face that she regretted allowing her son to get married to me since it hadn't been even 24 hours, and I'd already started showing my true colors. She thought that my rejection of his proposal meant that I didn't think he was good enough for me, and it was an insult to her son, which he was too blind to see. It wasn't anything of the sort, and I even tried explaining that I said no because of my own history and the fear of marriage, but she thought that I should have put her son's feelings above my own fear and said yes the first time itself if I loved him as much as I claimed. At the end of it, she promised me that she was going to break us up someday or the other. I had a feeling that my mother-in-law already didn't like me from the first time that my husband introduced me to his family, and that incident just made things worse for us. We avoid each other at most social events and tried to have a cordial relationship only for my husband's sake, but otherwise I don't like her, and neither is she a fan of mine. My husband has no idea, though, that my mother-in-law doesn't share the best relationship and is blissfully unaware of the arguments that we'd had all those years, and how she wanted to break us up because I wanted him to be happy, and so I kept it all a secret from him. And I've been fine with him not knowing anything about my mother-in-law because I didn't intend to turn him against my mother and make him take sides. This fight was between me and my mother-in-law, and he didn't need to be involved in this. Even when my mother-in-law would come over for dinner and occasionally make cruel comments about me, I would ignore them on purpose, and sometimes my husband would even double down on it and join in to make fun of me with my mother. I would forgive it since I believed that he just meant it in good humor and was treating his mother's words as a joke and nothing deeper. But all this changed a week ago when my husband, on his mother's advice, kicked me out of the house because of a story that his mother had fed him about me. I should have seen it coming, but well, love blinds you, as they say. Around a week ago, I'd taken a day off from work because I was feeling a bit under the weather, and my husband stayed home with me so that he could take care of me. Around noon, I was napping and was awoken by my husband, who looked livid and told me that I needed to pack up and leave immediately. I was extremely confused and disorientated, and in the time it took me to properly wake up, my husband had started throwing a proper temper tantrum and was shouting things like, "How could you do this to me?" and was calling me a liar and a cheater. I had no idea what was happening and was really alarmed by his behavior, so I decided to lock myself in the room because I'd hardly ever seen my husband in such a rage. After a few minutes, he started banging on the bedroom door, yelling at me to leave his house right away and that he'd never forgive me for doing this to him. I finally worked up the courage to ask him what he was going on about in the first place, and that pissed him off even more. He was screaming at the top of his lungs about me lying to him and cheating, and I didn't have any idea what he was talking about, so I was sobbing uncontrollably in the room. After around another 10 minutes of him raging on, he finally seemed to calm down and told me that I could not stay here anymore under his roof. after what I'd done. Once again, I asked him exactly what he was talking about. And that's when he said that his mother had told him everything that she'd seen the other day and that he was disgusted by what I'd done. That's when I remembered that a couple of days ago I'd been out with my boss for a business meeting at a restaurant near my mother-in-law's house, and I'd run into her as well, but we just said hi to each other and left it at that. I'd been waiting with my boss by myself, waiting for the others to arrive. She'd shot me a look that told me she was suspicious of me sitting with a random man at a restaurant, but I didn't bother explaining because it wasn't any of her business in the first place. And when my husband brought that up, I finally realized what he was talking about and how my mother-in-law was trying to create a misunderstanding between us. I tried to explain to him that while what she'd seen was true and I had been there at the restaurant with my boss, there was nothing weird going on. We were only there for a business meeting. He refused to even hear me out and said that if I didn't leave then, he'd forcefully remove me, which made me feel unsafe. He said that he trusted his mother implicitly and that she'd never do anything to hurt him, unlike me, so he's not interested in anything that I have to say. And apparently my mother-in-law had even sent him pictures, so that was hard proof for him. I kept trying to explain, but he cut me off repeatedly, and eventually he ended up saying that he'd break down the door if I didn't pack my bags and get the hell out. That was the last straw for me, and by then I was even feeling really angry, so I put some of my clothes in the bag and left. While I was leaving, he refused to even look at me or speak to me, and even though I was upset, I was also shattered that he was trusting his mother over me. I drove off to my mother's house, and she was quite surprised to see me, but let me stay nonetheless. I told her my situation, and although we've had a strained relationship in the past, she was infuriated on my behalf and told me that I must file for divorce as soon as possible. Whether or not he apologized to me was irrelevant, since the way he reacted and the way he'd kicked me out was absolutely unacceptable. He should have heard me out first at the very least, but he refused to even do that and went with whatever his mother was feeding him, which just showed how little he valued me. I'd been devastated when I'd come to my mother's house, but after talking to her, I felt considerably better and also a lot angrier because she made me realize that whatever had happened was totally unjust and unfair. I decided to give him 2 days to realize his mistake, but even after that, when he didn't text me, I knew that my mother was right and I needed to file for divorce. The humiliation of being kicked out of a house that belonged as much to me as it did to him was just beginning to sink in as the shock of the whole situation wore off. And on the third day, I contacted my lawyer and filed for divorce. I had mixed feelings about all of it. I felt hurt and betrayed, but mostly I was angry about how my husband had acted and the fact that he'd chosen his mother over me. Once and for all. She'd won, in a sense, since she'd finally managed to break us up like she had promised to. The day my husband was served with the divorce papers, he only sent me a message saying that he was glad that this was finally happening and wished me luck on my affair with my boss and hoped I got my promotion too. That was sad to read because it meant that this was really and truly over with, no hope for reconciliation, but I accepted the situation as it is. My mother was there for me all through the process, and that made me feel a lot better about things. My husband had decided not to contest the petition, and obviously that meant that this was the end. Yesterday evening I received a call from my husband and I was taken aback, but I answered it nevertheless. And I guess my mother-in-law had finally admitted that she'd been cooking up a story and hadn't really seen anything unprofessional happening between me and my boss while we were in the restaurant. His mother had told him that she'd seen me and my boss getting cozy in the restaurant and holding hands, which is why he'd refused to even listen to my side of the story when I tried to tell him the other day, and was just angry, which is why he acted rashly. He told me that his mother had confessed that she'd been trying to break us up and was happy that she'd succeeded, which is why she told him everything yesterday. And of course now he's sorry and wants me to take him back. He started apologizing profusely and told me that he'd acted rashly and I needed to understand that his actions had come from a place of anger and he didn't mean it, so I needed to think about it and forgive him. I was appalled that he was asking me to be understanding after what he'd done. In that split second, I made up my mind that I wasn't going to go back to this man at any cost. If his anger could drive him to act so insane, then I didn't want to stick around and find out what he'd do later on. He'd kicked me out over something like this instead of hearing me out, and I couldn't forgive that at all. So I told him that I wasn't coming back and that the divorce was happening now, no matter what. I think he'd believed that apologizing to me was going to make me forgive him just that easily. So when I said I wasn't coming back, he was completely shocked and started crying and begging me to forgive him and take him back. At one point, the situation just started seeming funny to me, so I just laughed in his face and hung up. He's been trying to text me ever since, but I haven't read any of the texts yet, and I don't plan on reading them. AITA for not giving my husband a second chance? Update 1. I didn't respond to my husband's messages, and for the past 2 days, he kept trying to get through to me unsuccessfully. When that didn't work, he ended up showing up at my mother's house today. My mother was hesitant to let him in, but I convinced her to allow him in so that we could talk. I had absolutely zero interest in sorting things out with him or whatever, but I just wanted to give him a chance to speak to me once and for all so that he'd get off my back and stop bothering me. I invited him in and spoke to him as civilly as he could, but he was hysterical. I sort of did feel bad for him and wanted to console him, but restricted myself to staying silent and letting him speak his heart out. He kept talking about how his mother had misled him into believing whatever she'd made up about me, and he'd bought it because she'd clicked photos of me with my boss chatting as well. He said that he was sorry for not giving me a chance to explain myself when I tried to, and was in tears about the whole thing. He told me that he'd even gotten into a huge fight with his mom as well over this and had gone no contact with her. There were a lot of tears and apologies on his end, but I was unmoved. I know I sound heartless right now, but truth be told, I feel like all my love for this man has evaporated the day he forced me out of the house over his mother's lie. He hadn't given me a chance to explain that day, so I didn't feel the need to give him a second chance this time as well. After he was done talking, I told him that I did appreciate his attempt to make things right with me, but said that I just couldn't forgive and forget what had happened. I couldn't just erase his psychotic rampage and his decision to kick me out because that was something really extreme and harsh that he'd done, so it was absolutely unforgivable for me. I informed him that I wasn't going to change my mind about the divorce, and I most certainly was not coming back. He sat there speechless for a while, but then he just went back to trying to convince me and said that he'd work on himself and that he'd change, but I didn't want to end up talking in circles, so I told him that it would be best if he left. When it became clear to him that apologizing wasn't going to work anymore, it was as if a switch flipped and he started freaking out once more. He started shouting at me about how he regretted even trying to apologize to me and said that he'd make sure I got nothing out of this divorce and regret it later. Thankfully, my mother was in the next room, and as soon as she heard shouting, she rushed to my side and told my husband to leave, or else she'd report him to the police. He left, still seething and ranting, but at least he was gone. It's been a few hours since he left, and the way he reacted just made me all the more sure of my decision about not going back to him. I'm working with my mother and lawyer for the settlement negotiations that will start in a few days, since he's probably not going to stop the divorce proceedings on his end either, and I'm definitely not going to, so that's that. Update 2. There were just 3 days to go for the first meeting, and I don't know why, but he thought that it would be a good idea to try and turn all our friends against me, so that they would speak against my character if it came down to it. He texted all our common friends and told them to confirm that I'd been cheating on him with my boss just for the sake of a promotion if it came down to it, which he hoped that it didn't, but told them still just in case. I hadn't wished to involve my friends at all, and none of them had known that we were going through a divorce in the first place, so there were a lot of questions. I knew that there was no point in trying to hide things anymore, so I decided to answer all of them with all honesty and told him every single detail of whatever had happened, right from the beginning, including what his mother had told me after we'd gotten married, to how he had kicked me out based on a lie. And they were all shocked to learn this, but promised me that they'd stop speaking to my husband immediately, even though I hadn't even asked them to not do so. But I was glad that they were choosing to cut him off on their own. Sadly, he has to resort to such dirty tactics, but I know it's pointless anyway because I just have to stick to the truth and stay honest. I've blocked him on all social media sites so that I don't have to see anything that he shares or what he says, because after our last argument, it had mostly been cryptic quotes about being cheated on for sympathy points, I guess. This is ridiculous since I didn't even cheat, and he knows that. But I guess he chooses to believe what he wants to, so whatever. Update 3. We had the first meeting with lawyers today, and I think it went pretty well for me. Obviously, I brought up how he'd unceremoniously kicked me out of my own house a few days back over something unsubstantial that his mother had said, and demanded that I be compensated fairly for everything that had happened. I don't think I had asked for anything more than what I was owed, but my husband was still kicking up a huge fuss about it. I'd asked for $90,000 as a settlement since I'd paid for half the house as well, and of course I'd spent a lot of money on my husband and our life during the course of our relationship. Not that I'd ever imagined that it had come to this, but I'd always kept track of my expenses, and I was the one who was taking care of most of the household expenses like groceries, electricity bills, and other miscellaneous things. My husband also did spend money, but to be fair, I wasn't the one who kicked him out, so I was the one who was owed the money. In addition to that, there was also the trauma that he'd caused me in the past few days with his raging and psychotic behavior, so I think my demands were totally and completely fair. But my husband tried to use the pictures that his mother had clicked of me with my boss at the restaurant to prove that I'd been cheating on him so that I wouldn't get anything out of the divorce. However, thankfully, I had pictures of the same day with the business associates that we'd met with. They were the eccentric kind, which was the reason we met them in a restaurant and took selfies to celebrate our deal. That was enough to disprove the theory that I had anything going on with my boss. Since then, we wouldn't be hanging out with other people on what was supposed to be a date. To my relief, my mother had also secretly recorded my husband's outburst on the video the last time he'd come over to talk to me. She'd kept her phone on the bookshelf, and it had been recording the entire interaction, right from his hysterical apologies to his rage-fueled rant, which showed that he was unstable. It also proved that he'd been lying about the whole cheating thing and was using the pictures to manipulate the situation, since in that video itself he'd admitted that it was his mother who'd come up with that whole story. I guess even my husband was surprised to see himself act that way and wasn't able to look me in the eye after that video was played either. Anyway, a decision hasn't been reached yet, and I have a feeling this might go on for quite a while. But like I said, I have nothing to be afraid of because I'm not lying. Anyway, I came back home feeling a lot better and more relieved than ever, since it had been quite tense for me in the days leading up to this meeting. And I came back home to a huge surprise in the form of my dad waiting for me. It felt strange to see my parents in the same house once more, since this was the first time they'd been in the same room even after the divorce, but it was still pleasant. My dad had been working in an area with little to no network coverage for the past few weeks, which is why my mom hadn't been able to get through to him. But as soon as he had heard about my divorce, he headed straight here, so that was really nice. We had dinner together and it felt so safe, so I think it was a good day overall. Update 4. The settlement has been finalized and I'm over the moon about it right now. It's been around 3 months since I filed for divorce, and I'm truly grateful that I was able to get this situation over within such a short time, because I knew that these things usually take several months. But I guess all the evidence was against my husband. He's supposed to pay me the money within the next 3 months, and we're also selling the house to split the amount we received. He's really angry about all of this and believes that he's been cheated out of his money and I don't deserve any of it. He's been posting about how I'm a gold digger who ruined his life and mental health constantly, and my friends have been telling me about it, but it doesn't bother me because the settlement is done with, and I don't need to respond to him. His mother has taken it upon herself now to guilt trip me and keeps sending me long messages from different accounts even after I keep blocking her to make me feel bad so that her son doesn't have to pay me anything. Obviously, that doesn't work on me, and if anything, it's making me feel more disgusted that she's even trying to do this to me since all of this was her fault. She's the one who made up lies and manipulated my husband, so she has nobody to blame apart from herself. But I don't think she's going to ever accept or understand that. Anyway, I've moved on from this whole episode. I'm really happy that I got divorced and I don't have to be with my husband anymore, since he showed me what kind of person he really was. Now, whatever happens, I'm done with this crap, and for me, this chapter is over. At least one good thing that came out of this was that I was able to reconnect with my parents once more. Now I'm just going to focus on myself and my career. Men are just out of the picture. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.